È un breve saluto a nome del Centro Culturale di Milano e di Admira Fotografi che in questi giorni hanno inaugurato negli spazi del Centro Culturale la mostra L'uomo e la terra, Luci e ombre di Burtynsky. Abbiamo il grande onore e la grande possibilità di poterlo incontrare e ascoltare. Questa mostra così importante perché regala a Milano un po' una primogenitura rispetto al nostro paese, all'Italia, perché è la prima esposizione di Burtynsky. È un fotografo grandissimo, di grande lavoro, e cercheremo di scoprire anche i segreti della scelta dei suoi soggetti, il segreto anche della sua tecnica, della sua angolatura visiva e concezione estetica. Il bel libro, catalogo, Quaderni del CMC numero 4, che forse avete intravisto all'ingresso, bene documenta il suo lavoro con più di 60 immagini tratte da vari continenti in cui lui ha lavorato e con due bei testi, uno un'intervista di Enrica Viganò che ha curato la mostra e che ringrazio personalmente perché ci ha fatto conoscere e incontrare l'opera di Burtynsky, e quando l'abbiamo vista l'abbiamo voluta, e io ringrazio molto anche lui perché ha concesso tanto, ha concesso in possibilità anche realizzative dal Canada qui a Milano, aiutando il Centro Culturale e Admira a realizzare questa occasione che durerà ben 2 mesi. L'altro scritto sul catalogo è di Giuseppe Frangi, che poi ci raggiungerà insieme a Enrica Viganò al termine della conversazione che terrà Burtynsky, e dopo la quale potremo rivolgere alcune domande a lui direttamente. La sua sarà una conversazione con immagini e dunque lo ringraziamo e ci apprestiamo a assorbire con grande energia il suo racconto. Grazie.
Good evening, and thank you, Camilo. Thank you very much, and I'd like to also thank the staff at CMC for doing their excellent work and helping us organize this show. And Enrica, always a pleasure working with you, and thank you for continuing to bring my work to Europe. So thank you very much. Enrica and I have worked before on different projects, and it looks like we may be working into the future on different projects as well. So it's great to have the support of a fantastic curator. This evening, I'm going to give you a tour of my work, and it'll pretty much be spanning about 25 years of what I've been doing with man in the landscape. And part of my thinking in terms of doing this work comes out of I think, my being Canadian. And part of that Canadian experience is that in Canada we have a very small population, 30 million people, and we have after Russia, we're the second largest landmass country on the planet. And that leaves a lot of space, and almost 85% of Canadians are located, as I am, along the 49th parallel, right on the border of the United States and Canada. And the rest of it, the other 15%, populate the far north. So the north of Canada is pretty much, empty. And I had a chance, and I had the opportunity to see that land and see what it looks like before we, we humans, go in there and change it. And to me, that's an important thing because that gives me a reference point. And to illustrate that reference point, it'd be, for instance, if you lived in Holland. And Holland is, 50% of the country is recaptured from the ocean. It's all man-made. It's a complete synthetic landscape. Every tree is planted because somebody wanted that tree there. Every bush is there because somebody wanted it there. Somebody planted it. Yes, there's a bit of nature scattered here and there, but it's a pretty controlled landscape. Every square meter has been divided and owned by someone. And then contrast that with coming from Canada and just the sheer scale of looking at raw nature is incomparable to something like living in Holland and never leaving Holland. And I think because I had that experience as a young boy and that kind of sense that when you're looking at a landscape, when I canoed by the shoreline with a small canoe that we would have to transport ourselves through small lakes in Canada, I imagined that the shore that I was looking at was the same shore that, let's say, the first Indians who came there saw 10,000 years ago, or the animals that swam in that lake and looking towards the shore saw 20, 30, 50,000 years ago, that this landscape was something, this is what the Earth's surface looks like before we enter. And although I tried at a very early stage, if we can dim the lights down just a bit more, especially on the screen. So I tried very early on to make pictures of this natural landscape, nature itself. And I spent a couple of years photographing it. This is one example where I'm just looking at grasses coming through in the spring from after the snow has lifted off the ground. So, but in that taking photographs of that landscape, I found myself running into a problem where I couldn't find a way to translate what I felt was something that was in my time, that it had a currency, that there were photographers in the past like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston and photographers of that generation, and they had captured, even Carlton Watkins in the past, and they had captured that landscape, and they were trying to preserve, I guess, what, you know, that pristine beauty and to show it, and in the case of Carlton Watkins and Ansel Adams, it was their photographs that were used in the American Congress that was the evidence of why they should build a national park system, and that park system still exists today. But it was based on the strength of those images of the wilderness that those parks and that whole legislation was passed. And me trying to make those images, I found there was something missing. As much as I enjoyed trying to capture that place, it didn't feel right. Something didn't feel right. And so then, to put myself through photography school, I had to work in industry. And I became very fascinated with the industrial landscape, the place where we go and get the things that we need, whether it's iron ore or nickel, gold, all the things that we consume on a regular basis all have to come from a landscape. It all comes from nature. And that started to weigh in on me. I started to think that as a photographer and as somebody who wants to create a series of landscapes that are more important and more relevant to our times, how do I begin to talk about that place out there in nature that we take the things for our daily consumption? And I also recognized at quite a young age that something was changing, that we were in a population explosion of unprecedented proportions. In fact, when I was born, there was 2.5 billion people in 1955. And we're about to hit 7 billion. That's almost a billion per decade. That is in fact, that's almost a tripling of our population in a mere 55 years. And that's what was different. That's what I was seeing in that landscape. Because Canada is largely a resource-based economy. 50% of our economy is about taking things from nature, extracting things from nature. And having worked in those mines and seen them firsthand and understood how they worked, and I understood how factories work, because I worked in all those industries because they paid well and I needed reasonable money to go into a photography program because I needed film and cameras and lenses and all of that, and that had to be supplied by myself, and my parents weren't able to help me at that stage in their lives, so it was really left to me to do that. But it gave me that look at those industries, and that began what I call my life's work, in that somehow I wanted to have the camera go into those places that we don't see, that we no longer are connected to, and to reconnect us through photography to those landscapes, to the places where we take from nature. So one of the things that occurred to me, one of my first significant projects was like a 3-part series. It was rail cuts, mines, and so that we needed the rail to cross the country to get to the minerals in the Rocky Mountains, so we built a rail across the land, and this is part of that rail system. The mines, we built mines once the rails were in there. And also the other thing I did was homesteads, how we carved our small homes in this vast landscape and connect ourselves to that land. So those are the first 3 ideas that I went. And this is a rail cut going through the Rockies in British Columbia. And what I did here is I looked at the 19th century photography. So my ideas were coming out of the history of photography, but I had to change them. So in the original photography of the rail going through the Rocky Mountains, it was always heroic. It was always the train, with the steam puffing around a bend, the river, the mountains, snow-capped mountains. It was always to celebrate and to create a desire to want to go there. Where I chose to photograph it in a very different way, I confronted it flat on. So you look at and nature is predominantly the top 3/4 or more of the image. And then there's this line that runs through that landscape, and in this case there's a line with a train, and it has a cargo in the bins of the train that is the same color of the landscape. And to me it was a great metaphor for the taking, our forever drawing the resources from the landscape. And so it was a meditation. It was a way to think about that landscape, and what does that human engineered line through that precarious landscape mean to that landscape? And how is it that I can begin to develop a language around landscape that begins to talk about man and nature and how we interact with that thing that we refer to? In that one might think that man is from and part of nature, but it's our cultural and our linguistic development has separated us. So there are humans and then there is nature, and that may be one of the most dangerous divides that culture and language has ever done, because it dangerously puts nature as something outside of ourselves. And that's a dangerous proposition, in that, if we do something to nature, if we harm nature, we in fact over time harm ourselves. And we've seen that now through pollution, and now we're seeing it through climate change, and we're seeing it through unprecedented and unpredictable weather, and water and land and deforestation, and all these things are beginning to find limits. And I didn't certainly understand that when I stepped out into this project 25, 30 years ago. I didn't understand how quickly we could change this planet. And it's only in the last decade that I begin to fully understand the implications of man's ecological footprint on the planet. So I went through and did the rail cut series. So that was my first kind of well understood series. And then I went to do open pit mines. So I went to find the largest. And one of the things that allowed me to move from the kind of general idea, I want to do a mine, I want to do a copper mine or an iron ore mine. So how do I begin? There are thousands of them, of each one of them. So to move from the general idea of photographing a mine to the specific mine, which one and why? I used the that's being built to support the car. This is in LA. A 4-level. This is one of the busiest and biggest intersections. And I chose LA because LA is where they invented the freeway. It's where they invented the suburb, pretty much. So it was the epicenter where it all began. And so I thought, again, referencing LA was important in the oil book because, that's where this urban sprawl began, and that's where the freeway, where a car culture was born, that you needed to have a car to live in LA. And if anybody's been to LA, you quickly realize that you have to have a car. It's the infrastructure and the public transport, which was purchased in the early, I think in the 40s. The public transit was purchased by Goodyear Tire, and because they didn't want people to use public transit, and then they closed it all down, and then started building roads so that people would buy more tires. Las Vegas was the fastest growing suburb. So here's Las Vegas. They built fake waterfront property, and that's a fake lagoon. So they built a lagoon in a desert where the Lake Mead is sinking at 6 inches a month, and yet somehow the city and the developers decide that it'd be good for real estate prices if they had waterfront property in the middle of Las Vegas. This is where the quarry, the pit, for all the material for building the city has been met by the city. So they never expected the city to ever come out to where they were withdrawing the material, but yet the city meets the open pit. And this is what they're building. House after house, air conditioning, car-driven culture. And looking at cars, these are Volkswagens in Texas that being brought over from Germany and China because they make them all over the world. But this is the logistics yard for distributing Volkswagens. This is taxis in China. This is 9,000 taxis, all, again, by Volkswagen going into China, Shanghai and Beijing. I then also looked at oil cultures. This is a truck beauty pageant, so cultures were around the machine. This is land speed records in Bonneville, so in Utah, where they try to break land records with these machines that people build, motors. And this is in 180,000 people at a NASCAR race in Talladega, near Birmingham. So again, looking at the theater of oil, looking at where oil and the machine is at the core of the event. So this is like just giving you when you look at this print, you see the massive amount of machinery and trailers and mobile homes and et cetera, et cetera. It just gives you a phenomenal view of it. This is where people with Harley Davidsons and other types of bikes gather for a rally in Sturgis in North Dakota. 500,000 bikers arrive in this town. This is the bikers' parking lot for a concert, a rock concert. Also looking at the kind of drive-through culture and the franchise culture that we've built, so that you don't have to leave your car, that you can just drive through. Also looking at the end of oil. So all things are entropic, everything has an end. This is some abandoned oil platforms in Azerbaijan. These are abandoned oil fields in Azerbaijan, abandoned 20 years ago, also from Azerbaijan. So these are landscapes pretty much left for dead, that there's really, the oil, and this is actually one of the few places, what you're looking at there, that liquid or that surface is oil. So this is one of the few places that you actually ever saw oil. When you see oil, it's usually a spill. It's a problem. It's kind of, I see it as blood in our veins. If you see it, you've got a problem. Well, oil is in the same way. It's an energy, and if we see it in the landscape, it's toxic. It's going to cause problems. But here, that reflection that you're looking at is actually all oil. These are abandoned aircraft in Phoenix, Arizona. Abandoned jet fighters. These are abandoned helicopters from the Korean War. Or again, just jet. These are all jet engines, all being ripped out for recycling. Phoenix is also known for the place to get scrap parts for your car. So they have thousands. It's got the lowest dew point. It's the driest place in the United States. These are crushed or densified oil barrels. These are engines, auto engines, being all being collected for recycling. These are oil filters from your car, again collected for recycling. This is one of the biggest tire piles in the world, and it caught fire soon after I photographed it. 2 months later, it caught fire. Burned for 2 years. There were 30 million tires. And the shipbreaking yards where they break oil tankers. That oil tankers, after the Exxon Valdez, they weren't going to insure single-hulled ships anymore, so they had to go and find a way to deal with all of those tankers. So they said, well, we're only going to insure double-hulled ships. So these single-hulled oil tankers, the biggest vessels ever built by man, were going to be broken down by workers. So I went to see where that happens, and it happened in Bangladesh and in India. I couldn't get into Bangladesh, but I did get into. I couldn't get into India, but I did get into Bangladesh. This is probably the most frightening and harsh workplaces that I'd ever seen. When I went and looked at this, I felt like I was stepping back and looking at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution 150, 200 years ago. Something, like Charles Dickens would have seen in Hard Times, and the way he transcribed satanic mills. So these were very much like those crazy satanic mills. It was a dangerous and polluted, unhealthy workplace that I'd ever seen. And dangerous in that I think they were averaging about 2 deaths per day, plus many other accidents, fingers gone, arms gone. It was unbelievable, the amount of injury that was happening in these yards. But there were about 25,000 workers taking these ships apart. This is what you're looking here is an inside wall of an oil tanker. So this is what the inside wall would look like. And they salvaged all the oil that they could find. They scraped it out of the bottom of these ships and they would put it into these big pools. This is it, an oil salvage operation. And this is in Bangladesh. It showed that literally these men worked barefoot, and this is oil that's filled their footprints, which I thought was somehow poetic. This is a recent oil spill. I did some work. This is currently showing in London as big oversized prints, 60 by 80 prints. But if you look in the top, at the very top, there's a ship up top, and that's a regular sized ship. So this drilling rig in the foreground is massive. And this is the rig that is drilling the relief hole to stop the hole that was spilling into 60,000 barrels into the Gulf of Mexico. So the Macondo hole. So this was drilling the relief well. But to me it was interesting. It was this kind of Frankenstein story where the technology that we built got out of our hands. It got away from us. And now, the drilling rig that was able to make the hole that caused the problem, all of a sudden it's surrounded by the monstrous oil, the energy that's released. So to me, it had a real powerful metaphor. This wild energy surrounding this ship. This is a similar kind of metaphor I'm working towards. And I'm just going to show you a couple quick pictures. I'm doing water now. So this idea of using water and how we use water, says, I think it's the second most important liquid after, well, oil and water are equally two of the most valuable resources to humans at this point. But this is looking at, shipping water through a desert in California to be able to create this. So that same water you're seeing just down the road takes desert and converts it into viable farmland. And so this is like, to me, it was a very potent way to begin to talk about water. This is a distressed landscape where they're having to irrigate Owens Lake because they drained it to supply water to Los Angeles. They drained a complete lake in inner California. And now Los Angeles had to pay over $1 billion to plumb a sprinkler system so that dust storms wouldn't come out of this valley, out of this lake bed, and create toxic dust storms, because it was a lot of leftover chemicals from farming. This is also that lake bed, the Owens Lake. And then this is around the Salton Sea in California, where another body of water became so much salt got into it, became overly salinated. And so all of a sudden, all the fish started to die, and this whole development that was started all of a sudden failed because nobody would move to that area. So again, it's something in the desert where things have gone wrong. I also looked at wells, step wells in India, so I'm just giving you a random few things of the new work that I'm doing. These are, again, step wells. This is how in India, in the northern Rajasthan, how they go down and get their water. But again, this is an indicator that they're draining their water tables with conventional pumps. So they're pumping out the water. So this used to always have water in it, and now for the last decade, this has never seen water, this step well. And it's largely just a garbage repository now. So again, being able to show water as a finite resource, this image began to do that as well for me. And then the celebration of water, the spiritual. This is a Kumela festival where 10 million Indians arrive on a single day to bathe in the Yangtze River, in the Ganges River. So this was a day that the 10 million arrived on one day, and to celebrate water. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Chiamo Enrica Viganò, la curatrice della mostra, e Giuseppe Frangi anche, che ha scritto un saggio nel nostro catalogo. Abbiamo assistito a una grandissima sequenza di luoghi, di storie, di immagini e anche di temi sociali e temi dell'arte connessi. Mi ha molto colpito che nell'incedere Burtynsky diceva spesso: non potevo non andare anche lì, non potevo non guardare a quella situazione, quasi come alla ricerca di un filo di collegamento tra tutti questi fattori che abbiamo visto, ma dentro, in sintesi, in questo rapporto fondamentale e profondo tra l'uomo e la terra in cui vive, l'uomo e la realtà. E infatti questo sublime che ci lascia senza fiato a volte è appunto questo scaturigine da questo rapporto. Io vorrei chiedere a loro due se hanno un'osservazione, una domanda da fare a Burtynsky, per poi chiedere anche a voi di intervenire. L'ora è certamente abbastanza già tarda, ma possiamo sfruttare questa bella occasione. Chi vuole di voi?
Eccomi. Innanzitutto grazie di questo viaggio che ci ha fatto fare, perché è un'opportunità unica di avere uno sguardo largo su quello che è la condizione del mondo oggi. Io, guardando le sue foto, c'è un aspetto che mi colpisce. Sente? C'è un aspetto che mi colpisce, cioè che da una parte c'è la documentazione di una situazione a volte al limite, a volte ha superato anche il limite. Sembra un mondo destinato a un punto terminale, no? che si documenta una situazione terminale. Però dall'altra parte le immagini sono di una bellezza sconcertante, cioè anche faccio riferimento in particolare alle immagini delle miniere o alle immagini di quei treni che tagliano le montagne. Sono quindi l'esito è anche di una bellezza che colpisce, che quasi affascina, direi, no? Quindi come si conciliano questi due aspetti? Cioè come la bellezza delle immagini riesce a mantenere l'allarme e la drammaticità del contenuto che viene raccontato?
The issue of bringing beauty as one of the components to transcribe that world. I think it's interesting. I've been having this conversation with different people at different times, but it seems that photography bears the ethical weight and maybe the criticism of saying, oh, well, you can't depict something that is what we see as, or what we think of as a tragic situation in a beautiful way, but yet all through history, that's how we've told stories. If we think of Shakespeare, the tragedies that he wrote about are of man's inhumanity to man, even to how families tear each other apart, are written in the most beautiful prose that you can imagine. If you think of movies, you can think of Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola making a gorgeous, beautiful, seductive movie of a horrific situation, and yet no one questions the fact that beauty is used. And so, in a way, what I felt that the 20th century did is it walked away from beauty, probably for many reasons. The aesthetics were seen as something that was bourgeois. The artists no longer wanted to supply that bourgeois with artifacts of their making to have trophies of their work on their walls. So there was a reaction against that. There was probably a reaction against aesthetics from the wars of the First and Second World War, and in that modern period, abstraction came in and other things, but beauty was considered no longer an option in the visual arts. And I didn't feel that way. I felt that the aesthetic component is something that is universally understood, that when an image is made and it draws the viewer in, then you now are communicating. You're actually bringing information across a bridge through a medium, and photography is that fantastic medium of delineating our world in such excruciating detail that I felt I didn't want the person to avert their eyes. I wanted them to be challenged by this attraction repulsion, that you're in a state of flux. You can't be stable in there. You either are drawn to it and you're actually thrown out of it as well. And it's in that kind of dynamic of that goes on in the viewer, this inability to reconcile these two things, that I believe is the force in the work. And I think that's why people are finding this work interesting, and it is finding audiences. And it's not just in Italy. I can show this work in Japan. I can show this work in China, and it has the same effect. So the visual language is a universal language. And so I was interested in being able to harness that language to bring difficult stories into our consciousness.
Buonasera a tutti, grazie infinite Ed per questa presentazione. Sicuramente la maestosità delle tue immagini ci porta a mostrare l'orrore attraverso la bellezza e a farci riflettere. Però una cosa che mi affascina tantissimo è comunque la fase di ricerca prima di questo scatto contemplativo che poi riesci a fare. C'è un lavoro di ricerca, di indagine, di documentazione importantissimo e mi chiedevo come lo organizzi, perché è una cosa diciamo fuori dal tempo, in questi tempi in cui il reportage deve essere rapidissimo nella realizzazione. Come ti organizzi se hai una squadra di molte persone che ti appoggiano?
I basically, in the research side of it, I tend, probably for the last 4 or 5 years, I've literally had a full-time researcher doing research for me. Like for water, I might say, go out and find out where the largest desalination plants in the world are. Or I might say, where is the largest redirection of water occurring currently in the world. So I might have these kinds of questions, and I put them forward to a researcher, and then they would go out and find those answers. Or if I have somebody who's specializing in China, they would then be able to go in to an area. I'd actually hire them to go and maybe fly to that area and with a digital camera capture what's there. Let me see currently what does it look like. So my the way I work is I probably spend 9 to 10 months out of the year engaged in various forms of research and production, and what I call this is dissemination, taking the work out into the world and talking and having exhibitions. And then there's probably about 2 to 3 months where I actually shoot. That's broken up throughout the year, and it may take me 6 months to a year to get into one location. I've worked on certain locations. That shot of the motorcycle rally in Sturgis, that was 3 years of negotiations to be able to make that picture. Oftentimes my images are in a long chain of letter writing and trying to coax them, trying to convince them, trying to get other people to write letters on my behalf, like the Canadian Embassy or government officials and things of that nature. So I'm constantly working fairly high levels of government and bureaucracies to be able to get access into factories and into what most would consider sensitive areas. I'm currently, as far as I know, the only photographer, and for sure the only Western photographer, but they said I'm the only photographer shooting some of the largest dams being built up on the Mekong River, up on the border of Burma and Tibet. So I'm the Yangtze and the Salween River and the Mekong are all converging in this one area in the Yunnan province, and I'm currently photographing them. So it's about connections, and it's about persistence and patience. I think those are the things.
Ecco, c'è a metà sala la possibilità di un microfono, se abbiamo qualche qui davanti, 2 subito, magari le raccogliamo insieme, così poi se si vogliono preparare altri ci sono.
Okay.
Prego.
Okay. First of all, I would like to say that I really appreciate your work, but I wonder if I really think to what do you tell us? It's a really negative, it's a really sad story. So I wonder, and you must be really conscious about all this, what you're telling us. So I wonder, how do you manage to use a car, to use your cell phone, and whatever, and especially, how do you manage not being depressed?
No.
Seeing all this.
It's a good question. Well, I mean, I think the way I'm very much a humanist, and I have a high regard for the human spirit and what humans are capable of, and that I certainly believe that hope is an important aspect of a position we need to take, because if you become hopeless, then cynicism is, nothing can be done. And I don't believe we're in that dire place yet where nothing can be done. But I do believe we're in a place where something has to be done, and that there isn't a lot of time. So for me, I'm engaging the tools that the machinery makes to deliver the message. I can't deliver that message. I can't show those landscapes unless I use the jets and the phones and the fuel necessary to get me to those places. And given all the kind of fuel that's used for really idiotic things, I feel it's okay to use some for something that may help, may add to the consciousness or to the awareness of what we as a collective are having as an impact on the planet. And the question becomes, is the world a better place with or without these images to describe who we are and to describe this part of our narrative? And I'd like to believe it's better that we have these images to help us understand who we are and what we're doing.
All'inizio at the beginnings of your conference, you were talking about one of your landscapes, and you said that there was no life there. And I started thinking that we are both defeated, I mean nature and human beings. At the end of your presentation, I thought that there is no direct counterposition between human beings and the effects on landscape. So I was wondering about, is it a political choice? I mean, many people cannot choose what to do if they refuse a kind of job or something. So is it an artistic choice? Because if you most of all want to focus on landscape, both of them, something else?
Well, it's interesting, and I think if I understand your question, is that not everybody has a choice of what they can and can't do, and is it? And the question I guess I'm wondering is, are you wondering whether it's a personal political choice or whether it's a choice of politics that we choose, you know, in terms of who runs our countries and what's their position? But on a personal political way, I think real change, the change that is important, is in our own behavior. When we start changing our own personal behavior, which may be a changing of our politics too, just saying, you know, at every decision, I'm going to try and do the right thing, to not eat a fish that's endangered, to not, unnecessarily use fuel to make my home as efficient as possible, to do all the things I possibly can to try and buy food from local farmers. You know, there's 1,000 different ways in which we can make decisions to reduce our impact as an individual. So I think those are real changes. Those are important changes, and we shouldn't hesitate in moving along that path if we care. If we have children and we care what world they inherit, I mean, I think that's a great motivator. I became more motivated personally once I had children because I was concerned about the world that we were delivering them, and I think that's and that's something that I think is very true for anybody who wants to go. When you're a parent, you start thinking outside of yourself to the next generation, to life, where you may not be there, but you want them to have a pleasant life or a comfortable life like possibly that you've had. My feeling, I have a lot less optimism in the political system, both internationally and within countries, even our own country, Canada, United States, and very few governments. You've got a little bit of hope in the Scandinavian countries and Germany, and they've all taken major green initiatives. But most countries are status quo, and government isn't putting in regulation or making the tough decisions. And I can see that it's not just the government's fault; it's the electorate. If a government goes and puts a carbon tax, and it puts the country into recession, they'll never get reelected. Period. We won't elect them again because you did something that caused us unemployment and pain. So why would we bring you in? So it's a very tricky thing to implement and impose policies that are right for the environment and also good for humans as well. That we may not be able to achieve the cuts that we need in consumption without some pain. And are we prepared to take that pain? Is a big question. So government, until we start asking for governments to, level the playing field. And so, quite frankly, I think the easiest and smartest thing we can do is to stop encouraging or subsidizing oil and actually put the proper cost of burning oil, like the externalized cost. So let's say burning a ton of gas is into the atmosphere may have a downstream cost of $100 a ton, and that's where we have to get to. So a tax that starts at 10 or 15 and moves to 100 to eventually put the proper cost to that consumptor, so the consumer pays, will quickly begin to accelerate alternatives. But as long as we subsidize it and allow big oil to make decisions and to keep policies like in America from being enacted, then they'll continue to externalize those costs, and we won't be able to move to cleaner. Because I believe that it doesn't have to be dire. I think we can retool ourselves to actually be real producers of energy. Because I disagree with anybody who says that they're oil producers. They're oil extractors. Nature produced the oil. They're just taking it out of the ground and changing it chemically to be useful for us. But when we make solar and when we do wind power, solar power, wave power, geothermal, that's producing energy. That's us producing it. And that's the big difference. So we need to move away from extracting easy energy and producing real long-term solutions to our energy problems.
Lì al centro.
Thank you. Hello. Please let me thank you for the very clear exposition. It's quite unusual, and it's incredibly reassuring to be able to participate in what is an incredible project in such clear terms. My pretty obvious question is, you obviously started your career in documentation, and you confessed that it was well paid for, to become now one of the foremost artists in the photography scene. Shows in museums, wonderful publications, books. Your photos are being sold in art fairs. I'd like to know, being in the field myself, where do you draw the line? To what extent do you consider yourself a documentation photographer? And when do you see yourself, or when do you begin seeing yourself as an artist? Some of the photographs which you conveyed had incredible poetic effects, emotional. Others were just mind-blowing in what you denounce, but perhaps less artistically orientated. I think it's an interesting issue because photography does bear this ambiguous line in today's market. To what extent is it art? To what extent is it documentation? Thank you.
In many respects, every photograph on some level can stand as a document. It's a carrier of information. And it's interesting that they become more evident as carriers of information the older they get. So when we look at images from 1880 or 1890 and it's a picture out on the street of, we see what cars they drove and the typefaces that they put on their businesses and the way they wore their hair and their coats that they wore or whatever, that the person at the time wasn't thinking that they were creating a document that would somehow sum up the values and the aesthetics and the times that they were in. They were making a photograph in the moment of the place where they lived or near where they lived. So I think that photographs carry, I think there's two polarities. That on the one polarity, we can see kind of like reportage and documentary. So and reportage being more of looking for current events, looking for conflict, looking for floods, anything that's happening, a murder scene, you know, that the journalist is there covering an event. And I don't see myself in that light as somebody who's chasing these kinds of events. To me, mine is an intentional landscape created a day at a time to produce an end result, a profit for a group of shareholders, and things that we use every day, and that's what I see when I see those landscapes. But what I'm trying to do is use, I guess, my skills as a photographer and understanding light, understanding tone, line, shape, texture, and applying it to a whole array of possible subjects. So I'm led by the ideas, and I'll say, okay, I've got this idea to photograph a desalination plant. I've never photographed one yet, but I've got an idea, and it'll probably resonate. I'll probably pick up things that I learned when I photographed refineries, because they were just another kind of refinery. So I kind of include them in the narrative, because to me, I'm letting the subject, be part of the work. And I see, for me, where this image is successful is when neither the content or the form is overpowers the other, so that they're both of equal power, so that the subject and the form, the image and its ability to capture our imagination, to make us stop, to invoke a sense of wonder of what this place is. So that's, to me, a part of the form, getting the light right, the line right, the composition, the colors, all those things, the time of year, all those things have to coalesce. And when I get that right, then I know I'm there with the content, because there's a 30-year compendium of ideas. And this is another one that I believe is strong enough to fit this compendium. Now I have to find a way to make an image of it that will appear as if it came through my authored voice, and through that becomes a part of something that fits into the larger body of work. So I want that kind of, I'm looking for that kind of image that would easily, say, oh yeah, that fits in with what I've done, that it's just one more addition component to the larger body. And I do agree, some feel more documentary and some feel more artistic, and that's just, I think it's subject driven. I think some subjects allow themselves to go into that greater abstraction, and others don't. But I don't want to disclude the ones that don't, because I feel that they still add significant dimensions to the narrative.
Ce n'è un'ultima? Oppure... Ecco, allora concludiamo questo nostro incontro. Vorrei suggerire un piccolo pensiero sintetico che non intende essere una chiusura, ma un'apertura. Mi colpiva nel dialogo e nelle domande e nelle risposte questo rapporto appunto tra forza, bellezza e maestosità di una lotta epica dell'uomo, e nello stesso tempo delle sue conseguenze. Ecco, il suggerimento è ripensare alla parola sublime che è uscita questa sera, e che trattandosi anche di fotografia e quindi anche di documentazione e arte, in un equilibrio giusto tra questi due poli, sublime nasce da un limite che accende un rapporto con la verità, con l'ultimo, con le cose ultime. Io credo che Burtynsky documenti nella terra, nel rapporto dell'uomo con la sua realtà e con i suoi fini, con il perseguimento dei suoi interessi e desideri, esattamente questi due poli in cui c'è la scarica elettrica. Questa scarica elettrica sono come dire, le immagini, e la forza della sua ricerca è questa capacità di reperirle, di invenirle, cioè di trovarle nel nostro mondo. Certo c'è un messaggio etico al fondo, ma nel contempo dobbiamo trovare in qualche modo la risposta che unisce come una calamita i due poli, altrimenti rimanderemo tutto a un pensiero di cambiare il nostro futuro o di dichiarare il nostro passato un niente, una bruttura. E il punto di calamita è pensare che l'uomo che agisce anche in quelle miniere ha il problema e il tema della propria felicità come soddisfazione della propria umanità, non soddisfazione delle proprie voglie immediate naturalmente o egoismi. Ecco, queste due cose convivono dentro la situazione più drammatica e tragica o dentro la più grande volonterosità, dentro la più grande impegno. Colpisce che per arrivare nel fondo di una cava, quella del Cile, dove non c'è neanche viva una mosca, quindi forse è giusto anche farla, occorre la geometria e l'ordine per arrivare in fondo. Non sia possibile arrivarci attraverso il disordine o attraverso il non pensiero. Ecco, questo tema del sublime io credo che sia dentro in ogni atto e azione umana e l'arte lo sa in qualche modo sorprendere. In ultimo chiudo con un'immagine. Liu Sain, di cui qualche anno fa abbiamo riportato le sue immagini al Centro Culturale di Milano, quelle sia delle costruzioni dell'Empire State Building ma anche quelle delle fabbriche, erano gli anni 20 e 30. Liu Sain era un sociologo, Burtynsky era un lavoratore che vedeva un mondo cambiare, un mondo che lo affascinava anche dal punto di vista tecnico. A un certo punto Hein non ha avuto più le parole per insegnare sociologia, ma ha voluto usare l'immagine per mostrare, documentare ciò di cui forse andava già parlando nelle sue lezioni. Ecco, ma in quel documento c'è uno sguardo di Hein, così come nelle fotografie c'è uno sguardo di Burtynsky che io credo che affondi le radici in questa dinamica profonda che non può dire tutto è giusto è a destra, tutto il male è a sinistra, ma che sia esattamente in questo sublime che certo la risposta non è solo l'arte, ma è il suggerimento, come ha detto lui, di un qualcosa su cui creare un nuovo pensiero. Però il pensiero profondo va a quegli uomini che a sera tornano a casa dopo le navi smontate, uno muore, l'altro no, e c'è il tema dei loro dialoghi, c'è il tema dei loro istanti, c'è il tema della loro umanità che vibra in questi paesaggi vuoti o in questi paesaggi pieni di umano. Io con questo voglio anche così consegnare il pensiero che ci ha colpito nel fare questa mostra e spero di aver anche dato un accompagnamento all'intento di Burtynsky e dell'artista. La mostra prosegue fino al 25 marzo, c'è un prezioso filmato di circa un'ora, Manufactured Landscape, che appunto ci fa vedere tutto il movimento prima o dopo le immagini, questi quadri che abbiamo visto scorrere questa sera in così largo numero. Quindi c'è una documentazione che tra l'altro è preziosissima dal punto di vista dei 3 anni, 5 o 10 per avere i permessi di stare in Cina o in altri luoghi. Quindi vedere questo filmato e vedere un pezzo di mondo contemporaneo in latitudini diverse, quindi avere la possibilità comodi su una sedia di sfruttare l'energia del nostro grande autore. Grazie ancora a tutti voi, grazie a lui, un augurio per il suo lavoro